GingerGM.
If someone tells you to expect the unexpected, slap them in the face and say, "Did you expect that?" In this game, David Bronstein, a very strong player who very nearly became world chess champion in 1951, gets a massive slap around the face. His opponent is Kholmov, a name which you may not be familiar with. You can see him above in the picture over there, let me get it right, with ex-world champion Kxa2, who is very friendly with. Kholmov was an incredibly strong player from the former USSR, or USSR, and he tied for the championships over there in 1963, along with world champion Spassky, so that just shows his class. He was given the nickname in Russian circles as the central defender because of his great skill at repulsing chess attacks. But as a lot of his opponents found out, Bronstein in this case, he was also a renowned attacking player. And this game is a beautiful example of what I call an empty square sacrifice. So sit back and enjoy. One of my favourite ever attacks is going to take place. So the game started with Kholmov for the white pieces playing e4, Bronstein playing c5, the Sicilian defence, knight to f3, knight to f6 now played, and this is a rather peculiar move. The critical test is e5 here, but knight c3 tries to keep things a bit more sensible. d6 and now d4, the open Sicilian. We have a capture on d4, pawn to a6, the Najdorf. And if you want to learn more about this, there is a DVD in the GingerGM shop which you can buy. Obviously a blooming good DVD, go and buy it now. Got to be worth the money, I'm sure. And here Kholmov picks the sharpest variation, bishop to g5. This move has been known to be a real test to the Najdorf variation for a number of years. This game was played, you know, in the 1960s, 1950s, and even nowadays this move is a very dangerous move for black to face. White develops quickly, attacks, puts pressure on the central position immediately, with 3 pieces developed to black's 1. Pawn to e6, the main move, so that if white captures on f6, black can recapture with the queen, therefore not doubling the pawns, even though that happens later on. And now f4, white throwing those pawns up the board, trying to create some threats with e5, maybe even this move f5. Bishop e7, breaking the pin, and now the queen comes to f3, following theory. And it's funny that this is still modern theory so far. White is placing his pieces on the most aggressive squares, getting ready to castle, lining up the rook against the black queen. Now queen c7 is played, and this is the standard square for the queen in the Najdorf from the black perspective, and white castles queenside. Every move super aggressive, another reason I love this game. Knight bd7, good square for a knight, controlling some central squares. g4, the pawn storm happens. Black has to create counterplay, and b5 is a way to try and do that on the queen side with some active play there. And now the main move, bishop takes f6. This is basically freeing up the g5 square. White wants to use this square to push on, normally with pawn to g5. Now in this game, obviously it is a rather old game nowadays, black took with a pawn. And this is now considered a slightly dubious decision in the opening. The modern treatment of this variation, if you want to play this line from the black perspective, is knight takes f6, not keep doing any damage to the black pawns. And here it would be logical for white to continue g5, and now the knight has to come back to d7. And white's most aggressive move is f5. Black can take this pawn, but that does open up an open line potentially towards his king. So castle's kingside now is the modern treatment of this variation. It looks very scary for black, but black has sufficient defensive resources. So after bishop takes f6, g takes f6, white continues with f5. A good move, targeting the e6 pawn. On the downside, it does allow the e5 square for black's knight, and this is a very nice square for that knight, a key square in the Sicilian positions for black pieces. This is one square that black often aims to take control of. The queen comes over to h3, and this lines up against the king, and black very bravely castles kingside. White doesn't mess around, and he aims to open up lines with g5. And in these situations with opposite side castling, it really is all about timing. You've got to come forwards, forwards, forwards. Don't mess about. Every tempo is key. It's not a slow maneuvering game. The kings are on opposite sides, so the typical way to attack is pawn storming, because a pawn storm doesn't work as well when your own king is on that side of the board. So imagine the white king was on this square here. Well, storming the pawns would be much more risky, because then the white king would lose its protection. And we all know protection is good in certain situations. So after g5, black now counterattacked, but here it would have been wiser to take on g5, even though white has a number of dangerous ideas here. Maybe just take it on e6 is the best way to play, but this would have been a better way for black to play. Because in the game after b4, trying to counterattack, white lands the first blow. And he who first attacks, he who first punches, often gets the win in these situations. White takes on f6, and now look at this. From this moment on, it's fantastic. Every single move is aggressive, creates a threat, and is just coming at the black king. I love it. It's pure energy at its best form here. That has to be taken. Rook g1 check. Why not put the rook against the king? The king has to go to h8. Now, there's certain things when you're attacking you need to think of. Checks first, captures next, and then creating threats. Creating threats is key. If we meekly move the knight on c3 away, something like knight b1, we're losing time. It's pathetic. Don't play like a wimp. Play like, I don't know, let's play like John Wayne. John Wayne wouldn't go backwards, would he? He would go forwards. So queen h6. Bringing the queen in, attacking the bishop and the rook. Only one defensive move. Queen to e7. And around here, maybe Bronstein thought he was safe, and this is really where we see the fireworks. Black has quite a solid formation in the centre, but white has a very dangerous rook and a very aggressively placed queen. And the next move is, I would say, in the grand scheme of things, one of the most brilliant moves ever played. When I saw this game, it made a very defined influence on my chess. Most sacrifices in chess occur on squares where there's already a piece or a pawn, because you're trying to rip apart the protection. Like taking on g7, taking on h7. You normally take something to rip the protection away. But some of the most beautiful sacrifices actually happen on empty squares. And the next move, knight c6, again, white trying to find the most aggressive move, is a fantastic example of this. It's a brilliant empty square sacrifice. Now, this knight has to be taken, and white loses one piece. What is the idea of this crazy move? Well, the idea is we freed up the e5 square, so here comes the next amazing blow. Pawn to e5. Boom! Fantastic. And these two sacrifices have really been played to give white the e4 square, because now there's a very strong idea of the knight jumping into e4. And another idea that white has done, he's given up two pieces to give himself this square, but also to open up maybe the line for the bishop to come to d3. So when you're attacking, you've just got to get your pieces to the most aggressive squares, even if it costs you material and time. Obviously you need to calculate as well. Now, what can black do against this? Well, if he takes on c3, white simply takes on f6, threatening queen g7, checkmate, threatening the queen, winning. If black goes knight takes e5, we now see the point of these double sacrifices. The e4 square is open and the white knight slips into that square. Threatening knight takes f6, and in this position white has a tremendous attack. How does black defend? It's very hard, maybe impossible. if black takes this with the bishop. This is my favourite variation because we see the third empty square sacrifice. Can you see the move now? You've got the theme of this. We're opening up lines. In actual fact, this pawn is in the way because wouldn't the bishop be fantastic on d3? So naturally, how do we get rid of the pawn in the most aggressive fashion? Pawn to f6. The queen cannot capture the pawn because if it does, queen takes f8. That rook is now not defended, delivers checkmate. So bishop takes f6 would have been forced, and now just bishop d3. And white again has a very strong attack. So e5 was met with a desperate bishop to g5 check, trying to get the bishop out the way so the f pawn can move, so the queen can defend. Rook takes g5, f6, because queen g7 is a major threat. And here, white keeps playing aggressively. This is really what you've got to do when you're attacking in these situations. You can't take your foot off the gas. You're racing a race, you need to come first. There's no middle for second place in chess. Pawn takes d6, creating another threat against the queen. Queen f7. And only here does white have to retreat. This rook is an important attacking piece. Rook g3. Don't retreat it all the way, because we may want to bring the other rook here, and we may want to put the rook on h3. Black grabs the knight on c3, and now white develops his last piece. You often need to get all your pieces boogieing for the attack to work. A little tip I have is look at when you're attacking, look at your aggressive pieces. In this situation, the queen and the rook. If they can't do anything, look at bringing in reinforcements, your pieces that are sleeping, the bishop and the rook. So bishop c4 pins the pawn on e6 and prepares rook g1. Very natural. Black took on b2, and now we see another great theme. King to b1, using your opponent's pawn as a defensive means. This is much better than opening up your own king. For example, had you taken on b2, rook b8, and black gets some form of attack. So using your opponent's pieces to defend, or pawns, can be a very clever, very high level thing to do. King b1, and black is in serious trouble. White's threat is simply rook g1 and then rook g7. How does black stop this horrible idea? Try to defend if you want, you'll find it hard. Knight to d8, trying to defend some squares. d7 would have been a nicer way to win now, because it would have stopped the following defensive idea with basically bishop takes d7 and now just rook to g1, rook g7 coming. White's idea still won, rook to g1 straight away, but it did allow rook to a7, giving black some hope. d7 now played. Probably Kholmov had seen that this was winning anyway. Rook takes d7. You have to try and keep all your pieces as black defending the g7 square, but now the bishop loses a bit of control of e6. So pawn takes e6, knight takes e6, and simply bishop takes e6. The queen cannot capture. Throughout the game, the queen has been looking after its friend on f8, but that's not going to last forever. So black is in dire situation. If the queen moves, there's a rook g8, followed by a rook takes rook, checkmate. So rook d1 was played, desperation. That rook was eliminated, and now we get the technical stage of the game. White has a rook for a bishop up. At this level, that's enough. And now he simply took on b2. And after some spite moves, it's clear to see that white has domination, and he goes on to win the game very quickly with some very careful tactics at the end. So I mean this game for me, you know, I'm a grandmaster, and certain games throughout my life have made me think about certain things over the chessboard, and this move in this position where white is attacking, this knight c6, giving up 3 points to allow the e pawn to move, giving up another point. And then my favorite variation was this f6 move, giving up yet another pawn. 3 empty square sacrifices in a row. Brilliant chess from Kholmov, who unfortunately probably did not release his potential because he never travelled outside of the USSR. Who knows how strong he could have been. He was certainly in the top 10 of strongest players in the world. His opponent Bronstein we'll look at again another day. I had the honour of meeting Bronstein and even looking at some chess with Bronstein on a couple of occasions, so we'll come back to him, and I want to honour Bronstein another time. But thank you very much for watching this video. Do please subscribe to my channel, do please like the video, and do please go away from this video with a smile on your face. If you didn't like it, why have you stayed around so long? Huh? Okay, see you again soon. Goodbye for now.